Welcome back, everyone. For those of you still standing, I'm going to encourage you to sit down. Thank you very much for your engagement and ideas over the last 2 days. It has been an intense 48 hours. My name, for those of you who weren't here yesterday, is Hiba Ali. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit independent news organization that reports about humanitarian crises around the world, as well as on the aid industry that responds to them. So if you are not already a reader of the New Humanitarian, please do check out our website in order to follow these kinds of issues. We will be also putting out a summary or report of this forum. So what do I make of these past 2 days at a time when the stakes are very high? Obviously, the conflict in Ukraine has increased the needs but also increased the cost of responding to humanitarian needs around the world. And this conference has been an attempt to look at how those challenges can be better responded to. 4 things stood out to me as an observer of the humanitarian sector. The first is that I don't know that we came up with new answers for how to respond to humanitarian needs, but I certainly saw a renewed consensus around some of the key issues. There were, of course, as always, I pointed it out yesterday, but calls for more funding, but also repeated calls to do things differently in the way humanitarian aid is delivered. We talked about the nexus, and Scott Weber of Interpeace reminded us that the nexus is not an option, it's a necessity. We talked about localization. We heard from Smruti Patel that when international organizations arrive, they should act as guests, not masters. We talked about anticipatory action and about the need to, first and foremost, resolve conflicts. And we heard from Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner for Refugees, that it is diplomacy that must prevail. So nothing new in that regard, but perhaps a bit more consensus in the face of the massive funding gap, that these issues are priorities that need to be pursued. We also heard renewed commitments to address climate change. We heard from Martin Griffiths, the UN relief chief, that this is the biggest crisis we are facing, the defining crisis of our time. And yesterday, the EU Foreign Affairs Council adopted a declaration in which EU member states committed to greater investment in preventing, preparing for, anticipating, responding to climate disasters, as well as greening humanitarian activities. I'll be honest, in that statement, there's a lot of striving to, contributing to, improving to, but I think it is a start and a concrete outcome of this forum, as I think yesterday was called for, would be more signatories to that declaration. We heard about calls for respect for IHL in the context of Ukraine, but also more broadly. We heard again from Martin Griffiths that IHL and access are fraying more and more each day. We also heard pretty repeated calls from humanitarians to be able to do their jobs, and that IHL also includes exemptions from counterterrorism and sanctions legislation in order for humanitarians to be able to engage with all parties to conflict. And in particular, Mariam Touré of Mali talked about the need for humanitarians to be treated with a presumption of innocence instead of having to prove that they are not financing armed groups. And in this regard, on IHL, the EU expressed its interest in supporting a non-political independent entity that would collect and document systematically violations of international humanitarian law, so watch that space. And lastly, I'd say we saw, obviously, as we just heard, a big focus on Ukraine, both the conflict itself, but also the resulting food crisis that it is triggering. You just heard from a number of players about their commitments to help on this front. And the EU also has plans, as the Commissioner laid out at a very late press conference last night, to address what, as he described it, would or could become the worst global food security crisis of this century. We also, and finally, I think, heard calls that while Ukraine is devastating, it needs to be put into context, into a global environment in which there are many other crises, and that it should not suck all the attention and funding away from other crises. And we did hear some indications that that may already be happening. So I do feel that while everyone seems quite daunted by the challenges ahead, there is increasing consensus around the way that the sector needs to adapt to be able to address these challenges. And to my mind, it's now a question of putting that consensus into practice. So that's my takeaways. For a more formal wrap-up, we're going to hear from a few key players, and we're going to kick things off with a video message from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. When we started preparations for this first European Humanitarian Forum, no one could have imagined that it would coincide with the worst humanitarian crisis in decades on European soil. Almost 3.5 million people have already left Ukraine, half of them children. We are seeing heartbreaking scenes at Ukrainian train stations. Women and children wave at their husbands, fathers and brothers through a train window, knowing it could be their last goodbye. In response to this emergency, thousands of European families have opened their homes. Countless associations and NGOs are providing clothes, shelter, medicines, or sending buses to drive Ukrainians to safety. All European member states are doing their part. To help them, we have made sure that European funds can be used with utmost flexibility in support of refugees. And we are proposing to allocate an additional 3 billion euros to support our member states that are welcoming our friends in need. Yet, the consequences of the Kremlin's aggression of Ukraine span well beyond Europe. Ukraine is the granary of the world. Ukraine alone provides more than half of the World Food Programme's wheat supply. Countries like Somalia rely entirely on Ukraine and Russia for their wheat imports. This Kremlin-made war is threatening food security across the world. And this is adding on an already dire situation. Humanitarian needs are at an all-time high because our world is still shattered by too many conflicts, from Syria to Yemen, from the Sahel to Ethiopia, from Afghanistan to Myanmar. Never in the history of the world have there been so many refugees. Millions of them are hosted in low-income countries. And all of this, while climate change threatens millions of lives all across the world. We risk entering a new age of famine in too many parts of the world. The European Union has set aside over 2.5 billion euros until 2024 to help the regions most affected by food insecurity. We will be readying a range of special measures to step up European food production, also in support of countries most in need. Europe is the world's largest humanitarian donor. We call on others to step up their contributions too, because the world needs humanitarian action more than ever before. This is a moment for all those who share a humanitarian spirit to join forces. Europe will stay committed and do its part.
And now he had hoped to be with us. Go ahead. He had hoped to be with us in person, but unfortunately, I suspect because there's a presidential election 3 weeks away, French President Emmanuel Macron could not be here, but he has made the time to send you a rather long video. So here is his message.
Madame la Présidente, chère Ursula, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres et les commissaires européens, Monsieur le Président du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge, cher Peter, Monsieur le Haut-Commissaire, cher Filippo, Monsieur le Directeur exécutif du Programme alimentaire mondial, cher David, Monsieur le Directeur général de l'Organisation internationale pour les migrations, cher Antonio, Monsieur le Secrétaire général adjoint aux affaires humanitaires, cher Martin, Mesdames et messieurs les chefs d'organisations non gouvernementales, chers amis, mesdames et messieurs, je regrette de ne pouvoir être parmi vous physiquement aujourd'hui, mais il était important pour moi de participer à la clôture du premier forum humanitaire européen. Nous avons voulu faire de ce moment un temps fort de la présidence française du Conseil de l'Union européenne. Évidemment, le contexte est là, qui pèse sur nos discussions, nos travaux, et qu'il ne faut en aucun cas éluder. Je sais que vous en avez beaucoup parlé et que vous y avez travaillé. L'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie marque le retour de la guerre en Europe, de la souffrance humaine qui l'accompagne, à un niveau et à une intensité que l'on ne mesure pas encore. C'est le rappel tragique de l'urgence pour l'Europe de construire une véritable politique humanitaire commune, reflet de ses valeurs et de son rôle dans le monde. Tout dans l'agression de l'Ukraine par la Russie est inacceptable. Le droit international est bafoué, les infrastructures civiles sont bombardées, des armes explosives sont utilisées dans des zones densément peuplées et les travailleurs humanitaires sont pris pour cible. Je fais bien vos termes, cher Peter Maurer. Le droit international humanitaire est cette ligne qui sépare la barbarie de notre humanité commune. C'est pourquoi je me réjouis que le Forum ait été l'occasion d'une mobilisation européenne forte pour l'Ukraine, mais aussi le Yémen, l'Afghanistan, l'Éthiopie, le Soudan ou le Proche-Orient. Le droit international humanitaire constitue un bien public et son application universelle doit constituer un objectif commun. Au-delà du droit, c'est l'espace humanitaire même qui est menacé. Parce que la vie ou la mort d'une femme enceinte dans une maternité se joue sur le terrain, je suis heureux que ce forum ait dégagé des solutions concrètes pour les acteurs humanitaires, agences, comme organisations non gouvernementales, dans toutes les zones où leur accès aux populations est empêché, entravé, monnayé. C'est dans cet esprit que nous avons impulsé, il y a un peu plus d'un an, à la Conférence nationale humanitaire, une dynamique avec les ONG françaises de l'humanitaire, les héritiers des fameux French Doctors, qui se muent aujourd'hui en European Doctors, tant la société civile européenne est imbriquée. J'y avais pris des engagements, et je tiens à vous en rendre compte. Engagements financiers que nous avons tenus avec le triplement des financements français dédiés à l'humanitaire ces 5 dernières années. Cet effort budgétaire sans précédent de la France nous a permis de débloquer 100 millions d'euros pour la réponse humanitaire en Ukraine. Et cet effort se poursuivra. Mais l'enjeu dépasse la question des financements. Nous nous sommes donc mobilisés avec les organisations humanitaires en France, dans les instances multilatérales, pour des résultats très concrets. L'accès bancaire des ONG menace l'acheminement de l'aide à certaines populations. Nous l'avons facilité en commençant par les théâtres de crise les plus difficiles. S'agissant des régimes de sanctions, la France a été à l'initiative à l'ONU pour introduire des clauses permettant de prendre en compte l'action humanitaire. Nous avons soutenu l'insertion de mécanismes de dérogation dans les régimes de sanctions. Et nous devons continuer à soutenir l'adoption d'exceptions humanitaires partout où cela est justifié. Je pense en particulier à l'Ukraine, où il est urgent que soit garantie la mise en œuvre sans entrave de l'aide européenne à destination de la population. À titre national, nous avons confirmé aux ONG que la non-discrimination des bénéficiaires de l'aide humanitaire est un principe que nous souhaitons défendre et protéger. Nous espérons que cette exigence que nous nous fixons sera prochainement consacrée au niveau européen pour préserver une aide neutre, indépendante, sans porter préjudice à la lutte contre le financement du terrorisme. Mesdames et messieurs, nous sommes à un moment de clarification où l'effectivité du droit international est mise à l'épreuve. C'est pourquoi la France et l'Allemagne ont lancé en septembre 2019 un appel à l'action humanitaire, endossé à ce jour par 53 signataires. J'encourage d'autres États et organisations internationales à le rejoindre, car le droit de la guerre n'est pas optionnel. La protection des civils, la protection des infrastructures civiles n'est pas négociable. Ceux qui trahissent ces règles devront rendre des comptes devant la justice internationale. C'est le sens de la saisine de la Cour pénale internationale par 39 États le 2 mars, dont l'ensemble des États membres européens. C'est une démarche inédite dans l'histoire diplomatique, à la mesure de la gravité de la situation. Œuvrer en faveur du respect du droit international humanitaire, dénoncer ces violations, punir ces auteurs, contribue à la préservation de notre maison commune. Nous nous sommes également employés à renforcer la lutte contre l'impunité des auteurs de crimes commis contre des travailleurs humanitaires. En France, les parquets ont été invités à rechercher la plus haute qualification pénale pour les faits dont ils seraient saisis. Plusieurs régimes de sanctions onusiens visent désormais les auteurs et commanditaires de crimes contre les travailleurs humanitaires, et cet objectif doit être poursuivi devant la Cour pénale internationale à chaque fois que les crimes commis relèvent de sa compétence. Nous, États membres de l'Union européenne, devons en effet être fer de lance de ce combat, en droite ligne avec nos valeurs de paix et nos valeurs de solidarité. Et nous devons aller beaucoup plus loin et bien plus vite. Cela implique tout d'abord de nous doter des instruments qui nous permettront de répondre aux crises humanitaires de manière autonome. C'est pourquoi la France soutient le lancement d'une capacité européenne de réponse aux crises humanitaires, en complément du mécanisme de protection civile qui a fait ses preuves dans le cadre des ponts humanitaires installés dans la lutte contre le Covid-19 et ces derniers jours pour l'Ukraine. Je souhaite que cette nouvelle capacité puisse être mise en place au plus vite. Nous devons ensuite continuer à incarner nos valeurs de solidarité par l'accueil des populations qui fuient la guerre, comme l'Europe a su le faire ces dernières années à l'égard des réfugiés en provenance de Syrie, d'Afghanistan ou du Soudan. Face à l'afflux de réfugiés en provenance d'Ukraine, l'Union européenne a déjà accueilli plus de 3 millions de personnes qui fuient le conflit et a décidé de mettre en place un dispositif de protection temporaire avec un accès à l'hébergement, à la santé, à un accompagnement social et à la possibilité de travailler. Les pays frontaliers se sont déjà fortement mobilisés et je salue à nouveau leur solidarité et leur humanité et je propose que chaque État membre participe à cet effort d'accueil. La solidarité européenne doit s'appliquer. Mais cet effort de solidarité doit aussi être mondial. Tous les pays qui le peuvent doivent recueillir les réfugiés qui en font la demande. Et je réaffirme ici solennellement l'attachement de la France aux conventions sur le statut des réfugiés. Troisièmement, l'invasion russe vient aujourd'hui raviver le spectre de la famine et le retour de la crise alimentaire mondiale. Je proposerai cette semaine une initiative de solidarité internationale pour la sécurité alimentaire, afin que les pays les plus dépendants de l'Ukraine, et de la Russie d'ailleurs, ne soient pas pris en otage par cette guerre. Comme pour ACTA, au début de la pandémie de Covid-19, l'Europe sera au rendez-vous de la solidarité. Elle mobilisera ses partenaires du G7 et au-delà. Nous le voyons, nous ne pouvons pas choisir entre gérer l'urgence d'aujourd'hui et celle de demain. Parce que les crises humanitaires sont l'échec de la paix et du développement, nous devons redoubler notre investissement dans les processus de paix et de développement. Je souhaite donc que l'Europe, pionnière dans la lutte contre le changement climatique, contribue à la mise en place d'un système humanitaire qui prévient, prépare, anticipe et répond aux risques et conséquences du changement climatique. Car le défi climatique s'impose à tous, mais condamne plus directement encore les populations vulnérables. Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs, plus que jamais à travers le monde, les défis humanitaires nous obligent. L'explosion des besoins est le symptôme d'un monde devenu plus brutal, mais aussi de plus en plus marqué par le dérèglement climatique, par les fléaux sanitaires. Elle nous oblige à pousser notre ambition, à bousculer nos pratiques, à faire évoluer notre logiciel, par exemple sur l'articulation entre humanitaire et développement, ou la conduite à tenir pour contourner le risque d'instrumentalisation de l'aide par des régimes totalitaires. C'est pourquoi je tenais à vous redire aujourd'hui la détermination de la France à contribuer à la construction d'un environnement propice à l'action humanitaire et au développement, à soutenir l'ensemble des acteurs humanitaires engagés sur le terrain, dans des conditions parfois extrêmes et au péril de leur vie. Non pas seule, mais dans le cadre de l'Europe, cette communauté de valeurs et d'actions est là et sera renforcée. Ce forum humanitaire, organisé pour la première fois sous présidence française du Conseil de l'Union européenne, a posé les premiers jalons d'une politique humanitaire commune. Et je formule le vœu qu'il puisse se tenir tous les ans avec l'ensemble des acteurs engagés pour faire le point sur ces avancées. Nous devons être à la hauteur de l'histoire. Je sais que tant d'entre vous le sont sur le terrain et nous obligent. Je compte sur vous et nous serons là, au rendez-vous.
Well, he wasn't here, but it sounds like he did hear you all, and he has responded to your calls. I will now be asking the Swedish Minister for International Development Cooperation, Matilda Ernkrans, to join us. Sweden will be co-hosting the next European Humanitarian Forum under its upcoming EU presidency. And not to put any pressure, but I think a lot of people at the forum were wondering what all of this is going to lead to. And so I think there's a big expectation that all of these recommendations that have emerged over the last few days, from funding women-led organizations to more flexible funding, from not criminalizing humanitarians to reducing the overly rigid due diligence requirements, that all of that be acted upon. And I think Juan Carlos is here. Yesterday in the session he said, in the next European Humanitarian Forum, I would like to know if we will be able to say we are implementing these recommendations. So, Minister, over to you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that was a long list of hard work that the only way forward, in my point of view, is that we need to do this together, being among friends. I think I can say that we need to do this together if we actually want to put all these points forward. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we see the Russian aggression against Ukraine unfold before our eyes, we are witnessing horrendous breaches of international humanitarian law. Around the world, conflict parties are not just targeting civilians, hospitals, schools with impunity, but increasingly preventing those in need from accessing life-saving assistance, and even attacking humanitarians seeking to provide it. And this is simply unacceptable, so we need to move forward together to address this. Humanitarian needs are growing faster than ever before, and during my visit to Moldova last week, I could observe the number of Ukrainian refugees fleeing their country increasing by the minute. Even if the events in Ukraine and the neighboring countries attracts most of our attention now, I am pleased that we can gather here at the forum to discuss how to tackle challenges in the humanitarian system to assist people in dire need around the world. I would like to thank the European Commission and the French presidency for the initiative to organize the European Humanitarian Forum for the first time. A forum in this setting provides a key opportunity to show how European humanitarian assistance can make a difference, but also to gather policymakers, humanitarian partners, and other stakeholders for the discussion on the extreme challenges confronting the humanitarian system. And I am pleased to see so many attending the forum in person, but also for those who have not been able to travel to Brussels to follow the discussions online. Ladies and gentlemen, levels of global humanitarian needs are unprecedented. More than 44 million people in 38 countries stand on the brink of famine. More than 1 billion people live in countries with large climate threats. 11 out of 15 countries with humanitarian crises are in ongoing conflicts. The effects of COVID-19 are still driving humanitarian needs worldwide. Now is the time to step up our collective efforts to meet the extreme challenges the humanitarian system is facing. When I took office just a few months ago, the figures for people in need for 2022 broke another record. The number of people in need has more than tripled since 2014 and is over 60% higher before the pandemic struck. With the war in Ukraine, just 3 months into 2022, the figure has increased with 6%. And the humanitarian consequences go far beyond the borders of Ukraine. With 44 million people already teetering on the edge of famine, rising food and fuel prices risk pushing Afghanistan, Yemen, and countries in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa into catastrophic hunger. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these daunting challenges, allow me to outline three strands of action that we need to address collectively and together. Firstly, climate change has a huge impact on humanitarian needs. We know that 20% of the climate-related disasters are predictable and that 50% are foreseeable. We also have clear evidence that acting ahead of humanitarian crises saves lives. There is a clear-cut case to invest more in anticipatory action. Secondly, Sweden is proud to be a top donor of humanitarian assistance, but it is not only about quantity of funding, but of quality. So I'm especially proud that we are one of the largest donors of quality funding. We need more donors to provide flexible funding. Flexible funding contributes to a humanitarian system that is effective, transparent, and coherent. A humanitarian system that can deliver in an emerging humanitarian crisis such as the one we now see in Ukraine. Thirdly, there is also clear evidence that we need to broaden the donor base. We are all friends, as I said, in this room, and I believe I can state that today the humanitarian system relies on much too few donors. It is not sustainable that just 10 donors provide 88% of global humanitarian funding. So finally, I would like to conclude by inviting you all to the second edition of the European Humanitarian Forum that will take place during the Swedish presidency of the European Union in spring of 2023. Together with the European Commission, I look forward to preparing for the next forum so that it can be as productive as this one. Thank you for your attention.
And now, last but not least, a by now familiar face will take us home for the last portion of the forum. European Commissioner for Crisis Management, Janez Lenarčič, will give us his views on what he's taking away from these last 2 days. And I'm going to sit down this time.
Dear colleagues, this is it. This forum is coming to a close. And I would like to thank our co-host, the French Presidency of the Council of the European Union. And in particular, I would like to thank you, the participants. You represent really a wide range of stakeholders, from the humanitarian community and beyond, including the European Union, the institutions, the member states, other major donors, countries affected by crisis, and humanitarian partners, humanitarian organizations, and civil society. Many thanks to you all. Many thanks to our moderators, to our panelists. Thank you for all your contributions. Over the past 2 days, this forum highlighted the unprecedented humanitarian needs, and it recalled the main drivers of these needs: the conflict, the old ones, the persisting ones, the new ones, the resurging ones. It recalled the dramatic impact of climate change that is set to increase, and also the pandemic and its fallout is still with us. We have discussed challenges facing humanitarian organizations on the ground. Basic norms and principles are being tested as rarely before, making the delivery of humanitarian aid more difficult and more dangerous. The obligation to comply with and respect the international humanitarian law has been highlighted at the highest level at the ministerial session. We tried to look at ways of further enhancing the impact of humanitarian response. European Commission's communication of March last year, the EU Humanitarian Action, New Challenges, Same Principles, the subsequent Council conclusions and the European Parliament resolution on new orientations of the EU humanitarian actions were, at least for us, an important part of the basis for our discussions. And the forum also recalled the call for humanitarian action co-launched by France and Germany in 2019. A lot of discussion was about how to ensure even better effectiveness and efficiency of the delivery of aid. And if there is something that we have learned from the recent past emergencies, it is the need of being better prepared for unprecedented crises. We should be able to react to and unblock any crisis situation in an agile way. In this context, I'm proud that we in the Commission are further developing our European humanitarian response capacity. We were able to reinforce humanitarian air bridge capacity, as well as to continue our work on the creation of pre-positioning stockpile of emergency relief items in case of need. Participants agreed on the vital importance of the nexus to bridge short-term interventions with durable long-term solutions in situations of fragility, of conflict, and of addressing the root causes of conflicts and protracted crises. We heard from the representatives of local humanitarian organizations, who are usually the first to respond to crises. In order to deliver fast, quality, and cost-efficient assistance to people in need, more needs to be done to strengthen local capacity and to support them. These exchanges will serve us as valuable input for one of the actions that we have announced in the communication on humanitarian action, which is to develop guidance on the promotion of equal partnership with local responders. In the coming weeks, we will launch a consultative process with a wide range of stakeholders on this future guidance, building also in particular on the exchanges here at this forum. We also launched the humanitarian logistics policy to better frame our approach on the matter. Another important policy is the thematic policy on cash transfers, which was just released at this forum. It includes the large-scale cash guidance note, which has formed the basis of a constructive discussion with partners. These are documents that form the basis for our future work, and they will give us a framework to develop actions in the near future. This forum also took a pretty good stock of the dramatic gap between the funding needs and the available resources for humanitarian action. Yes, resource base remains extremely narrow, far too narrow, with a small number of donors covering the near totality of humanitarian funding needs. And yes, I agree with Mathilde, this is not sustainable. We noted recent increases in some donors' humanitarian funding, and we salute them, but we also emphasize the need for much greater effort to share this responsibility for humanitarian funding more broadly and more equitably. Donors that participated in this forum agreed to step up engagement with the new and emerging donors, including those who have so far been largely absent from the humanitarian effort. While stressing the need for a broader resource base for humanitarian action, the forum also emphasized the need for sustained efforts to enhance the humanitarian response with existing resources, including through innovative financing, flexible funding, multi-annual partnership, and other elements that we all recall from the Grand Bargain. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent illegal aggression on Ukraine obviously featured prominently at the forum. When we were planning for this forum, we of course had in mind our attention to European response to crisis elsewhere. We did not expect that we would also have to include the need to address the humanitarian crisis, humanitarian disaster unfolding right here on the European continent. We do stand with Ukraine at this difficult time, and while this most recent additional crisis has taken a lot of energy, we are not forgetting about other crises, about our other regions where our solidarity continues to be needed. Like Afghanistan, like Yemen, like Syria, and so on. These situations continue to be among the most critical areas with protracted crisis. And we are watching and will continue to care for Sahel, for Somalia, for Haiti, other places. We will not forget any. We'll be there. This forum is ending, but our discussions will continue. We have already got the confirmation from the future Swedish presidency of the Council of the EU on its readiness to be co-hosting the second edition of this forum next year. We have the ambition to make this forum a regular feature, a regular annual feature in a humanitarian calendar here in Brussels. We would like to continue to offer a platform for all donors, for all partners to discuss humanitarian issues, solutions, and actions. And we are already thinking about how to frame this second edition, and we'll be reaching out to the humanitarian communities in the days and months to come so that we can take our discussions further and forward in true partnership. In the end, I wish to thank and congratulate the ECHO team under the leadership of Director General Vivi Mihu and the Deputy Director General Michael Köhler. I know how much work and effort went into this event, into organizing it, and also all the many pre-events and preparatory meetings. And we also had to postpone it once because of the COVID restrictions. And at the same time, the ECHO team work on other important humanitarian issues did not stop, of course. On the contrary, the workload only increased. I do appreciate and praise the dedication and commitment of the ECHO staff that was displayed in the preparations for and conduct of this forum and in the EU humanitarian action in general. Thank you.
That brings the first ever European Humanitarian Forum to a close. There will be more of the Humanitarian Talk session online tomorrow, so you are free to tune into those, and all of the sessions that took place over the last 2 days are also going to be available if they aren't already on the forum's website, so you are welcome to rewatch all the wonderful sessions you heard and share them with others. For those who joined us online and in person, thank you very much for your participation, and see you next year.